We all taught and or learned online this past term at University of Alberta, and it's had its highs and its lows and its easy and its difficult moments. And many of us are going into further classes in the next term. And so we thought it would just be interesting here at the end of term or very close to it to just reflect on what we learned, what surprised us, what we do differently next time. And the goal is just to help us understand the different perspectives that are alive in this call and yeah, perhaps come away with some pedagogical tips or some success tip. And our first speaker is Renee Beausoleil. Go ahead, Renee.
Great, thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's good to see a good turnout this late in the term. Yeah, as David said, I'm Renée Beausoleil. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science, and I am currently team teaching our Poly 101 experiment in doing a sort of mega course of sorts with 3 other instructors and a team of fabulous TAs, at least 2 of which are here today. I believe. I saw a son clapping there. Yeah, so I thought I would start by sharing a story about a camping trip I took this summer, actually, and with some friends. And one of those friends was Jessie Lawyer, who happens to be a librarian at Mount Royal University. And Jessie and I got to talking, and she was saying, you know, it's a funny thing how we're always telling undergrads not to cite Wikipedia, and yet we never tell them why. And you know, we don't explain to them that an academic encyclopedia article is different because the person writing is embedded in a field of study. They explain a topic in this whole broader context. She was just, yeah, upset that we were just, you know, commenting that this was something missing. And so for 101, I made a point of responding to what she had said. And we already had a learning objective related to conducting academic research. And so I made a point of including this as one of our research skills we addressed. And I think what it, for me, really, I think it's more common to more or less assume students will gain research skills as a byproduct of the kind of assessments that we give. And I think in 101, what we tried to do is put quite a bit of intention into what we thought of as scaffolding any skills we wanted them to pick up. So what this meant was we always integrated the skill in the reading, in the instructional content, in the weekly online activities, and in our assessments. So if you'll bear with me, I just thought I would really quickly screen share to kind of show you what this meant kind of on our eClass page. So can I get a thumbs up from people if you can see my Chrome? You can see my eClass? Okay, cool. So tying it back to this academic encyclopedia example, Jessie Lawyer's thing. And so in earlier weeks in the course, we had assigned an encyclopedia article as part of the reading. First of all, we referred to academic encyclopedias in some of the lectures in these weeks. And then in our week on sovereignty, which was within our IR unit, then we provided a video, which was generously created by our political science librarian, Katie Cooler. People are familiar with her, she's fantastic. She created this video for us on how to find reference sources like encyclopedias, handbooks, relevant to political science. Quite a good video. Anyway, show the students where you can find the Encyclopedia of Political Theory and so forth. Then for our discussion forum this week, we asked students to find a reference source on their own and to explain how it helped them better understand some issue of global importance. And in this case, that week, we had a pretty conventional textbook chapter and a more radical second reading. And so we kept this forum activity quite wide open, which really gave students an opportunity to kind of go in any direction they wanted in terms of looking up something within the topic further. And finally, on one aspect of that, these are our guidelines for this unit portfolio assignment we did. one of the research task then in that portfolio for that unit was to then also find 2 articles related to the research topic in an academic encyclopedia or handbook. So anyway, that's just my one little example of how we attempted to integrate research skills with the online curriculum and online activities and into assessment, starting with a walk at Pigeon Lake Campground. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Renee. Next up is Abigail Isaac. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Abby. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm in my 3rd year of an undergraduate degree studying an honors in political science with a minor in economics. And I am coming from the perspective of a student who is taking a full course load, and I'm also working this semester, and I'm president of the Political Science Undergraduate Association. So I've been privy to some discussion around what it's like to be teaching in these conditions, but I think I've been listening more to students who've been talking to me about the challenges that they've been facing learning, and also just my own experience. And I've encountered a lot of surprises. I think there are a lot of things that I haven't anticipated about what learning this semester would be like for me. First of all, I didn't anticipate that I would have to like relearn how I learn, if that makes sense, and kind of the extent to which I would have to recalibrate. And even for me, I mean, I love Google Calendar, very organized, really like lists, love, Excel spreadsheets, but still found it really challenging to kind of get my head like in the space where I could work at the same level that I was working at before. And I think other students have also talked about that, and learning not to take that personally, the fact that their work ethic looks different, and the fact that they're maybe not completing assignments, or their attention span looks different than it did before. And so that's something that surprised me. But also, I guess on a more positive note, something that surprised me was like the online like solidarity almost of students having like all of us experiencing the same thing, and not even just at the U of A, just the way you could connect to students on other campuses, even in other cities, to an extent where we're all feeling similar things. So as much as it has been almost hyper isolating, there has been an extent of like connection that I didn't expect I would find. And that's been really good, because I think without that, some of the challenges that we've been facing, I think would have been very difficult to overcome. And I think part of the reason that some students that I've been talking to have been able to make it through the semester is because of like the sense of empathy, whether it be from professors or other students, and being able to like, accommodate one another and be understanding of the different challenges that students are facing. I will say for myself, I'm also working online, and it has been difficult to learn how to work with my brain now, if that makes sense. And I think that's a common struggle from a lot of undergraduate students. And then also just being unable to plan for the future. So I think a lot of us are just kind of like floating in the space-time continuum, and just taking things as they come. But I think the empathy and the accommodation from professors has made it really bearable in my experience. And yeah, that's been, I guess, a summary of my experience so far. I'm looking forward to chatting with everyone.
Thanks, Abigail. Next up, Feo Snagovsky. Go ahead, Feo.
Yeah, everyone. I guess I just wanted to share 2 pieces of, I guess, conventional wisdom. So we were kind of chatting before the panel started, and we were all just kind of joking around the fact that none of us really knew what we were doing as the semester started. And there were some pieces of conventional wisdom that were floated around as like, best practices for how to start the semester. One is keep everything asynchronous. And 2 is use as little new technology as possible. Just keep it simple. So those are 2 kind of things that were brought up often at the beginning when we were all sort of figuring out what we were doing. And I think what I've reflected on is that, like all good rules, they're a really good starting point, but there are lots of interesting ways to break them, and there's also a lot of value, I think, sometimes. Maybe even if you start there, you don't necessarily end there. So in the case of synchronous learning, I've been absolutely shocked by how great a desire there is from our students for synchronous learning. So I've been teaching Canadian politics and quantitative methods. In Canadian government, we had an option where you could sign up either for synchronous or asynchronous learning, synchronous learning through workshops, asynchronous learning through forums. And overwhelmingly, more than 2/3 of the students opted in for the workshops. So, and the attendance has been fantastic. So there's actually, for at least, there are very real accessibility concerns, and not everyone can do synchronous learning, and there should definitely be an asynchronous option. But I've just been surprised by how deep the desire for many students has been for synchronous learning. The other one is on the use of tech, and on this one, I'll credit Jared, who will speak in a couple of minutes, to my conversion on this, because we're teaching parallel sections of Canadian government, and he told me early on about a bunch of new tools he was using, and admittedly, I was extremely skeptical. I was like, yeah, great, Jared, that all of that is fantastic. It's going to be great. And as I started teaching, I think I've become a sort of evangelist for it. I admit I was wrong here. So I'll just share my screen extremely briefly to show you some of the activities we were able to run because of some of these tools. So the two tools that I'll just bring up, and I'm sorry if I'm stealing your later thunder, Jared, but one of them is Miro, which is like an online whiteboard. And I couldn't figure out how to use this for the longest time, but it's actually extremely simple. It's just a whiteboard you can share with people. So this is a federalism simulation that I ran on the week on federalism, where I created a fictitious country and got them to draw the lines of a federation based on some preset parameters. Here we have an exercise that basically gets people to work together in coming up with arguments for various sides of a question. Then we have another activity where you're brainstorming collectively the differences between two concepts. And then a second tool has been Mentimeter, which I really was very skeptical of at the beginning, but it's a really great way to canvas student voices and to get them to provide in real time things that they are thinking about. So here's an exercise on political parties where you can just on your phone type in word cloud type stuff on things they associated with various terms. Then they place themselves, their classmates, the average Canadian, the average Albertan on a political spectrum, and you sort of get to compare their own preconceptions of this kind of stuff with the actual evidence from other data sources. So there's lots of interesting things you can do, and the payoff for learning some of these tools is actually pretty huge. So it doesn't actually take all that long to kind of dig around them, and the payoff is I found to be pretty rewarding. So I'll stop rambling on.
Thank you, Feo. Feo is a new arrival as an assistant prof in our department, a Canadianist, and so he has had his trial by fire. Feo, if you want to paste the URLs of those two tools into the chat, that'd be welcome. And thank you, Matt, for saying it might actually be safe for us to use the chat. So anyone,
don't post them, please, Feo. You just stole what I was going to talk about. So I will demo them with everyone now. You've done a good job of showing everybody what it is. I will demo it with the group. Please don't share those links yet.
Okay. All right. I think next in line we have Ansh. Go ahead.
So my name is Ansh, and I am a political science student pursuing a history minor and certificate in international learning. As a person, I really believe in the importance of community service, and I'm a strong advocate of diversity and inclusion. I've served on Minister Soy's Youth Council as a PSU AVP representative on the Office of the Registrar's Committee, and currently I'm in EPSB's Multiculturalism and Diversity Policy Review Committee, and I act as a social sciences counselor in OASIS. So I've actually spoken to some members of OASIS today, as well as my peers in the faculty, and I hope to represent a student perspective today. I think this is a tremendously difficult time for a variety of different reasons, especially if we consider the intersectional impact of pandemic. And for this reason, I feel that the guiding expression during these uncertain times must be empathy, which ultimately translates into compassion. I would like to discuss some of the challenges students face today, but of course, there is a silver lining to the dark clouds, and I'd like to acknowledge that there have been situations that have really touched my heart. Situations where professors like Dr. Kahane, with their humane kindness and compassion, have really helped during the semester. And I think students really appreciate the compassion during these times. Of course, in any discussion on teaching and learning during pandemic, I think it's important to recognize the consequences of a paucity of social contact and group support. Even as someone who is not the most social, I think this has been a very difficult and isolating period. We haven't seen friends in weeks. We haven't done the things we love. Motivation is lower than usual, and people are increasingly depressed. It's a period of increased anxiety and uncertainty. And students particularly, I think, feel very vulnerable, and mental health issues have really exacerbated. I think there needs to be a consideration of how to make this transition less stressful for students, of course. As the student union suggests, this might mean, for example, banning remote proctoring software, which have had some serious defects and are not meeting student needs. As David Raper asserts, like online proctoring software disproportionately flags people of color, people with hyperactive disorders. It's incompatible with a lot of accessibility softwares. I've myself had a really nightmarish, harrowing experience with remote proctoring this term, where the software didn't recognize me. I had no setup time. And because of technical errors, myself and a few peers received substantially less time than we were supposed to. And there was no proper recourse. So despite being exceptionally well prepared, it will ultimately harm my GPA for no fault of my own. We should also consider the effects of expanding workloads, which is something the SU has also called the university to recognize. Of course, there's often higher standards, despite this being a challenging, unusual time, a time of loss for a lot. And I think the university can do better in face of an unprecedented mental health crisis. Ultimately, I believe empathy and compassion should be our guiding emotions and are what really have helped us during these challenging times, I think, for instructors and students alike. I do believe that the pandemic can be an opportunity to better understand one another as we all work together to adapt and rise above the unique challenges of these unprecedented times. I look forward to discussions today and learning too from all you wonderful individuals.
Thank you, Ansh. Over to Jared Wesley.
All right, thank you. I do appreciate a lot the student perspective on this, because I've been checking in with my students weekly through evaluations, but also through conversations. And I'm reminded, I was wondering, and I know a lot of my colleagues from across the country have noticed this too, that we're seeing fewer and fewer students turning on their cameras as, of course, as the term goes on. So I wanted to unpack that a bit. And I had a really impactful conversation with a student who said, yeah, I can't afford Wi-Fi anymore. So I'm taking your classes from a Tim Hortons parking lot, and that's a bit embarrassing for me. Right. So I do appreciate, and thank you, David, for making sure that we have space for student commentary here today, because I think it is important to think about that too. I know for me as an instructor, I reached the point in my career where I'm not saying I'm phoning it in my classes, but I took it for granted that I could just walk into a classroom and speak, right? Especially in lecture classes, if you've taught them a number of times. And the pandemic forced me to be far more purposeful when it comes to my learning objectives, but also my pedagogy, and to think about what it is that we're using our classrooms to do. And for that, I fell back on literature that tells us that 70% of what we learn is through experience, through doing. 20% of what we learn is through other people, and 10% is actually through formal learning, what we do best in the universities, or we think we do best, which is through readings and through formal passive lectures. So this was a good excuse for me to finally break out of that mold, refresh my thinking about teaching, and I'm glad I did. I learned that experiential learning actually is possible online. I was a big skeptic when it comes to that. And when we were asked, for example, to put our new MA on Policy Studies program online, I said, there's no way we can do experiential learning. But as Feo just showed you, there are actual tools that allow us to do some of that. And I'm going to demo a couple of those for you. So I'll share my screen and I'll show you Feo shows you what it looks like from the student perspective. From the instructor perspective, it is super easy to use, and as well as from the student perspective. So am I sharing my screen? Okay, everybody can see my mural thing?
Yep.
I'm going to assume yes, okay. So this is an empathy map that I just built while we were having a great conversation here. It did not take long. I used a template that was available there. I go in and I make sure that when I copy my board link, everybody can can have access to editing it. And I'll just go over into my Zoom chat and share with everyone the link to this. So if you pull that up in another browser, you can look at what I'm sharing on my screen. You can see everybody start to come online. And now I start to see all of these busy cursors floating around. And I've actually taught students some systemic design or human-centered design techniques like empathy mapping through using these tools. So I'll leave this in the background. You can play around with it. I'll come back at the end of my 3 minutes and we'll see what everybody has done. You can see along the left-hand side, you have the ability here to create a sticky note. You can double click on any of those boxes that I have there to write what you want in terms of response to what. And in this case, I'm posing the question, what does the remote student, the student that's on remote learning, what do they at the top of this box, what do they think and feel? What do they hear from their classmates, from their instructors? What do they say and do? And what do they see? And you can go ahead and play around with that. You can double click and type. You can use all of the different tools along the left-hand side of the board. While you're doing that and playing around, as Feo mentioned, I use Mentimeter quite a bit as well. This is an example of a word cloud from my class from when students were just asked to simply click on a link. I'll share this with you now. Should say the Miro board is free. The Miro system is free for educators. Mentimeter with all of the cool stuff is about, was it $14 for the year? So it is affordable if you're an instructor that has a budget. If not, see me, I'll pay for it. So you can see, you can participate in this particular poll as well if you click on the link that I just shared with you. So there are ways that we can engage people in a way that's does not require a lot of heavy lifting on the part of instructors. And it makes it easy on students. I've not had a problem. I've facilitated some group sessions with baby boomers, okay, who are notoriously, my parents are like notoriously bad at adopting new technology. They had no problem with it and they're huge converts of it. So we can do this. We can do it properly. The last thing I'll leave you with was a piece, and David, you were part of this, and Siobhan, I see you here too. Hi. You were part of a discussion that we had about bringing Indigenous learning into our classrooms. And I took from that experience an activity that helps with relational learning that I talked about before. In other words, learning through other people. And in the introductory session in each of my classes, I have had a poem activity that I've done with them that asks them who they are. So I created a Google slide deck for each of my classes. Each student gets to pick a slide. And I asked them to tell us where they're from. So I asked them to fill out one bullet. The first bullet is something that you remember eating at home when you were a child. The second line is your first memory of politics. Third line is saying that an adult would say to you. Fourth one, which I'll come back to, is a song that played in your childhood home. And I asked them to put a YouTube hyperlink there. And the fifth is a memory that you have from your childhood. This helps to really create a sense of community in the classroom, in the class that I found. And I posted this deck. I let students know that I was going to post it. So please don't put any personal information that you don't feel comfortable sharing. So this is my poems, my own personal one. I'm from pierogies, pemmican, and hamburger soup. My first memory. I'm from Meech Lake and Oka. I'm from Never Take It for Granted, which is something I heard around my household. And I'm from Take It on the Run, which was from REO Speedwagon. Then what I did was take all of those YouTube clips and put them in a playlist. And I posted the playlist on the eClass site, but I also had the playlist playing about 15 minutes before every class. I still do it. And it's something to play the students in. And I see a number of them just show up to figure out what the next song is going to be. And we have everything from Corb Lund to Kiss to some fabulous music that I've never heard before. So anyway, there are ways, I guess I would say, to build relational and experiential learning into online learning that I didn't think possible before we started this.
Thanks, Jared. And the last brief speaker before we turn to discussion is Noelle Jaipaul. Welcome, Noelle.
Hi, thanks everyone. First, I'll apologize to my co-panelists for living in the metaphor of our entire semester, which is trying to sign into Zoom at 3:19 and failing, and then getting locked out of my account because I tried my password too many times, and then sending David, 17 very quick emails apologizing and trying to find a solution. But I'm here now. And yeah, I think that's a fitting metaphor for how a lot of people have experienced this semester, and potentially into, how people will be experiencing next semester as well, since we'll be still online. And I want to kind of quickly discuss something that Abby actually had spoken a bit about as well. And I forgot to really say who I am. See, I'm very discombobulated now. As David said, I'm Noelle Jaipaul. I'm a first year PhD student, and I am also TAing contemporary political theory, so that's 212. So I'm mostly going to be speaking right now about my experience as a learner, as a student, but I might also pull in some of that TAing experience as we get into the discussion. So anyways, what I wanted to say for the time being, when I found out we were going to be online before the semester had even begun, I was pretty disappointed that we would be completely remote in this semester, because I was thinking back to my master's program and how tight-knit my cohort became, and how important those people were to my mental health, my academic health, my social health, my physical health, all of those things. And so knowing that now I would be embarking on this huge PhD program, this gargantuan task, kind of alone, without that support, was quite devastating. And I was really wondering how I would be able to build that same camaraderie and closeness with my cohort this year, without, being physically present together, without being able to pass one another in the hallways, go get a coffee or a beer or what have you. But one silver lining of that I'd like to discuss quickly is, I think COVID has been a bit of an equalizing force, actually. And as students, we suddenly are in the exact same boat as our professors. We're all navigating this new and novel world of online learning. Our profs were no longer just business as usual, and perhaps were operating out of their element as they switched to e-learning, using online forums, receiving only electronic submissions for assignments rather than, physical copies of papers to mark, and so on. And of course, as first year students, we similarly felt out of our element, engaging in this brand new process of learning. So I myself had been out of school for about 6 years now, so it was a bit of a shock to my system. But, thinking back, well, we were all kind of out of our element. We were all kind of winging it as we went along. And now in COVID, we had this common touchstone that we could vent about, and we could share struggles and funny stories and mishaps. And it was a really new and interesting way to connect on a personal level with our professors. We were able to humanize everyone, develop a new sense of empathy with our classmates and instructors, which some of my co-panelists here have already mentioned. And we're all experiencing some level of uncertainty, discombobulation, struggle in this new environment, in this new normal. And sometimes it would be, the students guiding the professors through, this is how you screen share, this is the chat box, oh, you're muted, and so on and so forth. So we really had to rely on one another to make it through the semester, to make it through our individual courses or through an individual day, but then also more broadly through the entire semester. And I think that ability for us to soldier on together and share in the woes and the successes of online learning was really great, and helped to build a bit of that camaraderie that I was so worried about missing. But we were still able to build a bit of that despite having to remain distant, physically distant, and not meeting in person. And I guess I'm just hoping that when I see these faces in person, whenever that may be, maybe in a year from now, that I actually recognize people beyond the little box on the screen. But yeah, I'll wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thanks, Noelle. We'll turn soon to all of the folks who are here and any questions or observations you may have. But first, I wanted to give the panelists a chance to talk amongst yourselves. Is there something you heard from someone else that you want to challenge or ask more about? So I'll just open that to you and feel free to unmute and just dive in.
I was just going to piggyback on what Noelle just said. I think two things stuck out for me. First is, you talked about the humanization of it. It also takes the perfectionism out of it. I think we all realize that we're imperfect beings dealing with this at the same time. The one exception being recording online lectures, which for those of us that have a perfectionist streak can turn an 8-minute lecture video into a 2-hour ordeal. The other thing I'd like to say is, Abby mentioned this connection with other universities. Feo and I worked with Alex Marland, who's a co-author on the textbook that we used, and Alex is from Memorial University, and I was able to work with his students. We had some cross-country workshops where we invited them in to talk about things like regionalism, which was a fantastic way, to really build some relational learning into what we were doing, learning from other people through other people, but also, humanize it a bit and show that we're all going through this kind of thing together. So that's something that I hope we don't lose moving forward. We've always had, I hope everybody notices, we've always had the capacity to do these good things, right? But for some of us, we just needed to be pushed in order to do it. So I hope we see some of these success stories continue.
I mean, one question I'd throw out, oh, go ahead, Renee, please.
I have a really practical question. I'm just so interested in these online collaboration softwares. So thanks both Feo and Jared for sharing them. So I already asked in the chat if it works for students on their phone. But I'm also wondering, you say don't hesitate to learn it, but how long does it take to learn? Is this the sort of thing where, the very first time you try it, it's maybe a little rocky, the second week it works better? Because I'll just say I have a plan for my final week of my course that would work on this, and I'm a little intimidated in the very last week of class. Just how quick can we learn this?
I saw Jared shaking his head like, no, it's so easy, it's great. I will throw a little bit of salt on there before he has his chance. I found it kind of mixed, to be honest. I found it took me a week to learn it, but that was just because I'm not very good at this stuff. And once I kind of I think I like a better way to say this is I'm not as good as I think I am. I have like an expectation that as someone who's kind of grown up around technology, I'll just kind of be able to jump in and figure it out. And it's one of those things you need to take an hour to learn. And if you do that, it's super easy, but you kind of need to do that. But I'll let Jared provide the counter argument to that.
No, all I was going to say is Feo's already spearheading an activity now that would have us compile our best practices and our lessons and so on, and hopefully create a knowledge database for the department. So I'm more than willing to tutor anybody that wants to learn this stuff. It is actually quick. I think somebody who like Feo, who in a good way has to have it run in a very slick, great fashion. It may take a little longer to be more confident with it. But I think that the user friendliness of it makes up for that.
Okay.
So, I mean, just a little vignette from my own 212 course, intro political theory course this term. I gave students a choice with some misgivings, but it just seemed the best way to go forward, that everyone would take part in both asynchronous online discussion and live synchronous discussion in the first 3 weeks. And then they could choose. They could continue doing both, or they could just do the forum, or they could just do the live 1 hour plus an optional 20 minutes once a week. And about half the class chose each. And what I'm reflecting on at the end of the term is I was surprised at how much of a sense of students and of relationship I could gain through the live discussion. I have very little sense of the students who were in the forum, and that's fine, it is what it is. But the two questions that arise from this is I'm really interested in places where instructors gave students choices and what those choices were and how it worked. And then the second thing that interests me that comes out of that same anecdote is we've heard a lot from both students and instructors about the importance of that relational piece. And I'm curious whether there were particular things that particular spaces within courses or moments within courses, Jared was talking about his introduction exercise, that you feel were particularly important in opening up that relational possibility. So anyone who wants to dive in, and maybe we can go around with these, and then if there's nothing else burning, we'll turn it over to folks in the group. And since we have chat open, feel free to type questions into chat or to put up the blue hand or your hand if your camera's off and come in. But first, anyone want to tangle with those from the panel? Choices that you gave students and how those worked, or particular elements of classes that really supported that relational piece?
I think, Feo, you and I have talked about the unique differences between our parallel courses when it comes to choices. So maybe you could speak to that piece. I'll just say it really quickly. The easiest way to build the relational piece into your class, give them about 3 or 4 minutes longer than they need in breakout rooms. Because I've been floating around and students will get through what the activity was that they were supposed to do in the breakout rooms, and they're just shooting the breeze. And the old me, the before times me, would have said, this is an inefficient use of my class time. And it's actually anti-productive. They need it. Oh my gosh, do they need it? And it actually helps to deepen their learning because they're learning through other people. They're more open to them and they'll hear their perspectives. So.
Yeah, the kind of inadvertent experiment we tried when we ran parallel courses was that Jared let his students kind of choose from week to week, you know, whether they wanted to do the forums or the workshops. And I asked them to sign up ahead of time in week 2 with the caveat that they could always change their mind. So pick a format that works well for you. And if it doesn't work for you one week or you prefer another one, you can always change your mind. But my hypothesis in doing this was that a little bit of structure is probably actually a good thing. And they might want kind of a bit of predictability. It helps like with the pizza that just arrived. I like that. Yeah, now I'm very hungry. Anyway, so my hypothesis there was that they might want some structure, and if it's not working for them, they could always let me know. And I think we both, I think both worked reasonably well. The other option that I gave my quantitative method students was at the beginning of in week 1, I had them vote on the assessment. So I asked them, okay, look, here's the assessment that I need you to do over the course of the semester. You get to vote on the timing. Do you want to do it every week? Do you want to do it every other week? Like when do you want all this stuff to be due? And they overwhelmingly chose to have stuff every week, which I guess like in the context of a pandemic is, it's interesting. I mean, they wanted some structure. They wanted to be able to have something holding them accountable. But I saw Ansh actually about to say something before, so I'll stop talking.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that we're discussing choice. I wanted to bring this up as well, so I'm happy we're having this conversation. Yeah, I think like, for example, the choice of synchronous or forum posts is great. You know, I echo what Dr. Kahane says when he says that, you know, synchronous can be really useful, and I think students gain a lot out of it, you know, that interactional experience with the instructor as well as other peers is really, really useful where possible. So maybe to have that accommodation of an online alternative or like a forum-based sort of alternative might be helpful. But I think, yes, definitely for classes that are seminar-based, it can be so helpful. And so also, I think like one thing that I found helpful was like in a class, for example, if it's a slot of like an hour, to end off a little bit earlier and then to leave the last little bit for students who want to stay on and they want to continue to discuss. This has been something that I found extremely helpful because, it allows you to really, reflect on everything, to express yourselves, have some of those deeper conversations and questions, especially for the smaller set of students that might want to further their understanding or engage in those conversations. And so that is really helpful as well. In regards to assignments, I think, again, as we've had, our other panelists mentioned, right? Just to have those choices can be really helpful regarding, for example, due dates, or just in terms of the nature of assignments. I think any choice during this time where we feel like things are so out of our control during this pandemic, it's just, I think it grounds us and it's really helpful.
Yeah, if I could jump in really quickly, I think for that structure piece and for that choice piece as well, flex days, being able to allocate flex days has been something I've noticed from a lot of students that has been really, really helpful, where you get to choose as the semester goes on where you need more time and you can adapt kind of to your needs. So that's been really key, flexibility with deadlines, but then just ahead of time in the syllabus, just saying that they have, 3 flex days that they can allocate to different assignments has been really great. And I've also noticed different students have said synchronous learning has been helpful from them for that accountability piece. And because of that, they appreciate having more smaller assignments than they do like having really big cumulative exams, especially if it's like asynchronous content, where it can be harder to like hold yourself accountable and study consistently. And then you end up having to study for something worth like 50% of your grade at the end of the semester. And that can be more overwhelming than having to digest the content in pieces throughout like overtime over the semester. And I think for me, that's even helped like learning, right? Because I think I have a lot of my economics classes is completely asynchronous, just 2 major exams, and that's just your semester. And it's been much harder to understand what's going on in that class. And it has been where I've had to go in class and engage and meet other students and then do like reading assignments or do biweekly things that split up our learning. So that's been really good for engagement then for like a pseudo structure throughout the semester. Yeah.
Abby and Ansh, I just want to amplify what you're saying, because all of what you're saying makes sense in the context of a pandemic, but this idea of structured flexibility to me makes sense after we're done with the pandemic. I mean, what you're talking about is not anything that we can't do when we go back to class as normal.
Yeah, Jared, I like that phrase, structured flexibility. I think that it's interesting. We took a different approach. We did every other week where it was set that it was either a discussion forum or a live seminar on Zoom. And each unit, the students do a comprehension portfolio where there's a number of things that a number of little tasks and kind of feedback they give to talk about their comprehension of that unit, but they also give us some feedback to us about that unit. And consistently, we've heard from the students that they miss the Zoom seminars on the off weeks and they wish they could have more of the workshop. So that's been really interesting feedback to learn. And so, yeah, I do wonder in the future, but our ability to put a lot of time into really planning some, really interactive, active learning based workshops, I think, at least in our course, has been possible because we had those off weeks where we weren't running 8 seminars in a week in the forum. So I think in terms of also our capacity level as instructors, I don't know that I would have the capacity to plan the same level of engaging seminar every single week personally. But I do think we did build in some flexibility or structured flexibility, as David said, in the whole portfolio assignment, because there was never attendance taken at a single one of those forums or seminars. Rather, at the end of the whole unit, in a holistic way, the students then gave their own account of the ways that they could demonstrate their engagement in that unit through the seminars and the forums. So that flex was built in there. So no one was actually paying attention if you missed 1 or 2 weeks or there was an off week or something went wrong. But the more, we always said, the more things you attend, the better you're going to be able to demonstrate your engagement. So I think that's where we built in that flexibility a bit.
So before we bring folks in, Abby, there was a question in chat about what you meant by a flex day. Is that something that came from the instructors that you built in yourself?
It's something that came from instructors, actually, where they would note in the syllabus ahead of time that you had like 3 flex days to allocate throughout the semester, and you would have to email them before the deadline and let them know that you could use 1 or 2, I guess even 3 at once, depending on what your schedule looked like. And that just as long as you let them know ahead of time that you were extending the deadline by a day, then they do that for a student.
So it was about assignment deadlines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Others on the call?
I'd like to echo Abby on that. I think that can be really helpful. Sometimes the honest truth is that it's hard for students, when we are in a situation where, for example, we've dealt with loss or we're grappling with sort of mental health issues, to discuss that. I think it can be very difficult. And so when instructors, have things like flex days, for example, like, or, no questions asked, just like, let us know, that kind of thing. I think it can just be really helpful and just alleviate some of that stress and anxiety that's associated with that. So yeah, I think that's a really, really great point, Abby.
Others on the call, feel free to raise a blue hand, turn on your camera if you're comfortable doing that, and wave or type questions into the chat. Anyone want to come in?
I think Yasmeen's hand is up.
Oh, look at that. Go ahead, Yasmeen. I will ask you to unmute.
David, you had me muted. I couldn't use the chat. You didn't see my hand. I mean, I'm trying not to be paranoid. I just want to thank everybody for those presentations. They were great. And I just want to pick up on what Ansh was saying about the idea of the increasing amount of work. And it actually seems to me that we often discuss our classes in individual terms, and we say, oh, this worked really well, or that worked really well, and we managed to put together this course. But we have had zero discussion about the cumulative impact of all the courses on undergrads and what that means for them. And, I mean, the general advice we had coming into this whole thing was, we can't do everything face-to-face, even if your class even if you have a seminar class, you have to have some components that are online. But like, I think the online portions are ever mounting in the sort of amount of work. I mean, for a lot of students, like, that's my sense. And if everybody's doing the online forum and you have 4 or 5 of those to do a week, it's a nightmare. So, I mean, I'm just wondering, as we go into the second term, like, we haven't really had a collective conversation about this, because, and I don't know, maybe I'm sure Abigail might want to comment on that, like what it's sort of been like managing between all your classes, if profs are kind of engaging in similar sorts of activities.
Yeah, great question, Yasmeen. Thank you.
No, first of all, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think, for instructors to think about that, that itself, I think, means a lot to students, right? During this time. I think, there are a lot of differences, of course, during this time period. Like, for example, in classes, professors would, of course, have like lecture times, and then, they would often pause to let students finish their notes or their drawings. And I think that was really helpful, right? You kind of have that interactional level constantly, I think, in person. But in a lot of cases, I think online learning, and this is from whatever I've spoken in terms of students and also members of OASIS, like what they've experienced is, these increasingly fast-paced and harder to follow along with, previously recorded lectures. Often, class times were kind of completely got disrupted, in the sense that if it was a 1-hour lecture, it could sometimes be double the length, and that would also happen. An example of this would be like, posting multiple lectures on one day, because they weren't posted earlier, or, regularly releasing pre-recorded lectures and hosting synchronous lectures on the same day. So like, for example, if a normal class was set up for like 1 hour and 30 minutes, to have a 1 hour and 30 minutes live lecture and a 1 hour and 30 minutes pre-recorded lecture on the same day. So it effectively sort of doubles up the class material. I think it's completely possible to have it on the same day, but like, I've had some instructors who've done this really wonderfully, where, for example, if a class was structured from 3 to 6, for example, something like that, they would actually say, okay, like from 3 to 4, you have time on your own to watch this, 30-minute video, for example, and then come into class. We'll start our class a little bit later. So that's something that, for example, can be used to work around that. I think that there's a lot of actually potential during this pandemic that we're seeing with online learning, and a lot of opportunities. And as Dr. Abu-Laban mentioned, I think sometimes we just even though we would really want to engage and take part in these amazing opportunities that we're getting, it's just the cumulative effect of forum posts, for example, and it really adds up. So I think just to consider that is really important. And again, just going back to the importance of communication with instructors and students, which is possible through synchronous learning, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, if I could quickly jump in just to Ansh's point, the cumulative effect of all the classes, I think, has been felt for me more significantly than by far any other semester that I've been in. And I think that's because, like he's saying, online learning has blurred the lines between what I'm supposed to study and what I'm actually learning in class, especially with asynchronous content. And I've been in a lot of classes where they'll give you 5 lectures on a Monday that you're supposed to distribute for yourself throughout the week. And for a lot of students, that can be disorienting in that you end up having to catch up later, or it's hard to allocate time between learning and studying, or students end up just watching all of them before an exam. And so you haven't actually learned the content before, as opposed to being in class and learning something and then later revisiting it, doing your own notes or studying. So that's been an overlap that I've noticed where it can be hard. It can just be hard to structure your life. And then also, to Ansh's point, there's a lot of classes where you end up doing double the work, where they combine synchronous and asynchronous classes and will make you do things outside of class and also attend live lectures for participation. And that I don't know how effective that has been in learning more content. I think it just ends up increasing anxiety for students, in my experience. And Ansh, I'm not sure if you can speak to that, but that's been something that I've noticed.
In a couple of minutes, I'll just give permission, as if you needed it to disappear if you're in the audience. But is there anyone who needs to leave in the next few minutes who wants to get a question or a comment in? Okay, well, the floor is open for anyone who wants to comment or pose a question. I see.
Picking up on this thread of Ansh and Abigail. Sorry, I'm jumping in before David.
We're taking a risk here. I've given people the ability to unmute themselves. So,
I think part of it is that as instructors, we have to. There's a little bit of an ego involved in how much we know about things, right? And there's kind of a desire to be I want to tell you all the things that I know, because I know, I've been studying for decades to know all of these things, and I want to get them across to you. And part of it has to be, we have to let go of the ego of that and to say, we're just not going to teach everything that we know. We're going to dial it back significantly, and we're going to reduce the content by quite a bit, and allow it to be more activity driven. Because if we reduce the content, then that opens up the space to do these weekly, these lower stakes weekly activities, lower stakes assignments, and it opens up space for the students to not have to think that, especially because we already train our students to think that the purpose of classes is to learn content rather than to learn skills. And so by drawing back the content, then we open up the space for prioritizing other forms of learning. So for instance, in 101, we only taught 1 chapter per week. So we only did 13 chapters, and there was 20 or 21 chapters in the textbook. So, sorry to anybody if you're teaching legislatures next year and you're like, how come you didn't learn this in 101?
Come on, Matt.
But we did teach Parliament and constitutions, and we taught, other things related to it. So, but that was just, these were difficult decisions to make. But yeah, are you willing to cut out readings and content and that just part of it, I think, is not being so. I think there's an ego involved in it. So that's all I have to say.
Anas and David, you both have hands up, and I wonder if either of you is pressed for time. Feel free to unmute and dive right in if you are.
I think I let David go first because he raised his hand before me.
Go ahead, David, and turn on your camera if you care to.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I saw Renee said in the, sorry, I'll introduce myself. I'm a first year master's student in political science. Yeah, Renee just said in the chat, asking about, all the low stakes assignments adding up and feeling like an onslaught. So, I mean, I'm a master's student, I only have 3 classes, but it can still kind of feel like that. Yasmeen, I'm going to talk about your class now. No, it's all good things. So in Intro to Political Science, we have the weekly blog posts, but in the syllabus, it says, there's 8 weeks and, you got to do at least 6, ideally you do them all, but you got to do at least 6. And so from the get-go, I, in my calendar, picked the weeks I wasn't going to do it based on my, other assignments and maybe how difficult the topics were. But so that's the structured flexibility, really in action and has worked. And another compliment for Yasmeen's class is that in the syllabus under the course deadlines, there's a sentence there, about the deadlines, but this is an exceptional moment and common sense and compassion, will prevail in negotiating, the expectations and the deadlines. So even, from the get-go, I know this is a real human being teaching the class. And so, when I had to hand something in a day late this semester, I didn't worry about it. I just told Yasmeen what was up and I handed in the next day and it was all fine. It was great. So that little thing in the syllabus, it, takes no effort and I think will help people calm down a lot.
Can I just jump in on some of the points David just made? And I'm also in Yasmeen's class, so we won't pick on her. But I think that again, that structured flexibility is really important. That was the case in one of my other courses around, you have 12 weeks, but you submit at least 8 forum posts, and then you can divvy that up however you like. But I think just really practically speaking, and I thought of this when Matt was giving his point a minute ago. If you have a course syllabus that has a lot of recommended readings, just take those recommended readings out. That no one's going to read that. Maybe post it as a separate document on eClass, but honestly, I would see the recommended reading list and I would just get so stressed out thinking well, I'm a PhD student, so that means I have to read all the recommended readings, right? Or otherwise I'm not doing a good job. I should be really practicing and perfecting my craft of reading. So that's just kind of a really small change that I think might actually make a bit of a psychological impact, positive impact on students as they are shuffling through your syllabus. And in addition to that, I think that we're talking about a choice in posting on the forum or not, and I do really appreciate when it isn't just it's actually guided and there's something that comes from those forum posts, right? So it's not just okay, well, say what you thought about the readings, but a way to synthesize all of the information you did that week, whether it's from the lecture or not, because it does become a bit of a huge chore when you're just, typing out, this is what this author was saying, and that's what that person meant. So actually using it as a way to engage and synthesize that knowledge that students are supposed to take from that week makes it a little more engaging than just kind of rote regurgitation or what have you. And I did have one other point about a tangible, practical way to help students, and I've forgotten. So if it comes back to me, I will be sure to share that.
So over to Anas in a second, but I have one question following up on Noelle that I'm really genuinely exercised about as I plan for next term, which is that in 212, we had the forum, everyone did it at the beginning, and then people chose. And I tried to give it structure by saying, a critical question or challenge to one of the readings, and then you'd come in a second time if you're in the forum and respond to someone's critical challenge, speak back to it. And I think that was too structured. And so I'm just curious whether, and I felt this through my career, that it's hard to have online discussion, especially when there's a participation grade floating out there that actually flows like a discussion. Often it's more perfunctory than that. So I wonder if anyone has, from their own classes as instructors or students, a way of structuring a forum that has enough handrails on the one hand, but that doesn't squish discussion into too tight a box. Ansh?
Yeah, I'm having struggle with raising my hand. Zoom is kind of distressing me, but
in real life.
Yeah, but no, I'm glad we're having this discussion about the cumulative sort of effect that I think sort of the low stakes aspects can have. I think again, it becomes a question of like, I mean, from what I've spoken to with some peers, they talk about, for example, the fact that they might be really interested in the material, but just because there's so much that they have to do, they might be like 3 or 4 classes simultaneously with forum posts. So like at that point, I think sometimes it doesn't feel like participation anymore, but it rather turns into like another written assessment. And it also lacks that interactional, relational sort of aspect that's so important for participation, I think. And so, yeah, I think that's important to consider. And I also would like to compliment Dr. Kahane because I think in my class that I've had, it's the aspect of choice again was just so helpful, even in terms of like the assignments, right? Like, so even if we want to have like multiple opportunities for students, to keep that optional can be really helpful. And that's something that Dr. Kane's class does have, for example. So that just gives students more of an ability to be able to, I guess, have some agency and again, feel a little bit more in control during this time, where things can be really overwhelming. And I really appreciate all, these really humanizing conversations that we're having. It's just so great to see. I'm really, really appreciative.
Anas, go on in, and then we can cycle back around to this question later if we like.
Yeah, I just have a question about, I think Matt touched on this question, but I want to raise it again. Yeah, first of all, I am Anas Fasih, and I am a PhD student in the Department of Political Science. I'm not taking any courses. I have finished all my courses, so and I'm also not TA in this semester, so I haven't had my experience with online courses. But the question that came to my mind is, with respect to the information load, like especially when it comes to advanced level courses, 300, 400, 500, in an in-person environment where the instructor sometimes finds themselves faced with a lot of questions about knowledge specific, how do those dynamics change in an online environment? Like, is the focus more on an online pedagogy to run with little information, or there is also the quest for more information, pretty much as it is in an in-person environment for instructors? And also students can also attend to this question.
Anyone want to dive in?
Like, I think one of the ways that it can be made a little easier is that we really value what I'll call like interpretive thinking in the university, and especially in higher level courses. So this is the ability to assess, to evaluate, to provide comparison to other things. And all of these skills are actually very, very difficult to do at a high level. And so what I try to do, or how I think of teaching, is that we should allow a bunch of space for what I call like kind of more reflective thinking, which is that when you're reading something, you just have like, sometimes you have something that pops into your head and, a little light bulb moment, or, you read something and it's like, it impacts you in some sort of kind of deep way, right? And, that mode of thinking is more kind of like intuitive, right? And instinctual. And it's also based on experience, right? Because oftentimes you're reading something and then you're reflecting and you're thinking, and you're gaining new perspective on all these experiences that you have in your life. But the way in which we ask questions in seminars, like, what did you think about the reading? And the kind of the tacit expectation is to be able to assess it in this very scholarly, interpretive level way, right? And so to me, I try to build in a whole bunch of reflective, or like the majority of the talking should be reflective level kind of thinking that's going on among students, because everyone's having those light bulb moments when they're reading stuff. Everyone is like, you know, their synapses are firing, and just letting people follow their synapses, I think, is really important. And then there's going to be a select group of students who are of the highest level, who you can then do more kind of interpretive stuff with. And some other student, like, you want to do that with everyone to build it out a little bit, but it's not even the expectation that that's the primary mode of thinking. That is, so that's how I would approach it, is to try to create room for that reflective level thinking, which then helps to build out to the more interpretive level thinking that we typically try to teach.
Any other thoughts on this?
Well, David, to your question about how we can build some more conversation into our classrooms, and I'll say this is a work in progress for me, but Feo and I demoed an app. I don't want to sound like I've got a solution. I've got an app for everything. That's not it. I'm very selective with my apps, and I'm still working on this one, but it's called Perusal. I mentioned this earlier on in the semester when we were talking about this. So students can order their textbook directly through this platform if you're in some of the major publishers, at least. So this is our textbook, Inside Canadian Politics. And students are divided up into individual groups. And as they go through and they read, students are encouraged, we encourage them, you can actually build in requirements that students discuss the text in this way. You can see somebody has highlighted this text as they were going through and reading, right? If I go along to the left, one of the students, Fahim, has asked the question, is this part of the chapter, do you think they're describing the cleavages that are involved in the Canadian political system? Before I, as an instructor, can even hop on, several students have responded to that question. And then I, as an instructor, can go through and click and upvote it if I think it's a great answer, so it gets this nice green check mark. Now, I say it's a work in progress because we didn't use grading to force students to use it. So it was only voluntary. And the use of it has curtailed over time. I say you can also build in your lecture videos in as part of this library, and students can comment on specific parts of it. But I think it has great potential because it gets students to actually engage with the text. And the beauty of Perusal as well is that they have an internal built-in algorithm that will grade students' level of quality of comments as well. So they've used AI to figure out what is a great student comment, and they provide a very detailed and concise rubric so students understand what is a good comment, what is not a good comment. So I will report back to the department after we test it one more time, but I think it has great potential.
Anyone else who hasn't spoken up yet, who wants to come in with a question or an observation, or to chime in on something we've already talked about? I'm going to throw in another question, again, just being totally self-serving here. I took seriously how burdened students would be and decided that I'd record a lecture each week and post it on a Tuesday. And I tried to keep those to half an hour, though occasionally they went to 40 minutes. And then in the place of our Thursday class, we had live discussion for those who selected that track for an hour, plus the additional 20 minutes of the class. You could stick around if you wanted to, and maybe a third to a half of people would. I'm curious about how long a synchronous session was too long for you, for students or for instructors. Like, is there a sweet spot? Did anyone take you to 2 hours and 50 minutes?
Can I just jump in and say that all of my classes were obviously 3 hours. So on Thursdays, I was sitting in my chair in this room from 9:30 to 3:30, pretty much straight. And it's bananas. Like, I don't know. It was, by the end of that day, I just have to like collapse in a puddle on the floor. And by the end of the semester in one of my courses, it was, same thing that was referred to earlier, where it's just black boxes. Nobody has their video on except the professor. And it was a lot of really trying to stretch the class out so that we made it to that at least the 2.5 hour mark. And there were like, I was timing like literally 120 seconds of just silence. And I think, I don't know who that's serving, because it was clear that the students are at this point where we don't want to engage. Maybe we haven't done the readings, like let's be honest, right? It happens. And you know, and the professor is kind of getting a little demoralized at that point as well. So I think that we do need to play it by ear a little bit. There are some moments at which, like, you know, you can't end your 3-hour class with, you know, 20 minutes in. And you do have to find ways to encourage students to kind of be more vocal if they're not being vocal and if they're disengaging a bit. But there comes a point in time when you have to just acknowledge, you know what, this isn't working for anybody. Let's be creative here. Maybe we can all go on the forum and post something after the fact, but I can tell that this isn't going the way we intended. Let's call it. And I think it takes, you know, we just need to be realistic about that.
Yeah. Abby, do you have a take on what the range was and what your own sweet spot was?
Yeah, no, I second Dr. Hayes in the chat. I think an hour for me has been the best time. I'm also in a 3-hour night class, and that is really, really difficult to engage the whole time. And I don't think it's conducive to learning either. I'm also in Dr. Barnes' 464 class, Gender Conflict Security, and that's been really great, where we cut down the 3-hour seminar to like 50 minutes, and we split the group into 2, so the groups are smaller and you're able to like get to know people and chat beforehand, and that's been really great. And that I find I actually learn more, and I'm able to be attentive the whole time, in contrast to the classes where they are 3 hours long. And clearly, like now, I think a lot of students are disengaging just because it's the end of semester, and then you also have maybe readings that you can't do, and work is piling up, and people aren't talking. So for that reason, and also because it's kind of really exhausting, I think, by the end of the 3 hours. So yeah, I think 50 minutes, an hour has been really great.
Any divergent takes on that, or more to
I
say?
do.
And then Jared?
Yeah, I think sometimes even more than the synchronous lectures, it's the pre-recorded ones that can be a bit of a challenge. Because again, as I mentioned before, sometimes the issue is, of course, that they, you know, those natural class times no longer exist, so they can be much longer. Other times, what I've talked to a lot of students during this process and in preparing, and what a lot of them have said to me is like, sometimes it feels like a cramming of information, which at that point is not really conducive to the best learning that is possible. And so, yeah, I think we've had some instructors mention here, you know, how just kind of, you know, figuring out how we can limit those expanding workloads. I think that's something that's really important to consider. And also, the other issue, I think, is sometimes students feel very alone during this time, in the sense that, you know, when we're in class, we have a peer support group often. You know, we can really reach out. I'm the kind of student, I think, I've been with Professor Wildcat, and he would know I'd always come to him after the class and ask a bunch of questions. And that's just the kind of, like, that's how I am for all my classes. And I missed that this semester so much. And I really, really thrived in that environment, in the sense, because we had those opportunities to discuss with the instructor, you know, and so I think communication during this time is just so important. You know, offering support through those office hours, one-on-one. I can speak for, again, Professor Kahane's class, because in terms of communication, it's like right up here. You know, we, on emails, I've never had the issue of you know, having to wait for days perhaps to get a response. This has happened, you know, with so many students I know, where they have some sort of a confusion, for example, or you know, they're just dealing with a lot, and you know, it could be something comprehension based or personal, and they're just not even able to get in contact sometimes with professors, and that can be really, really difficult. So I think, yes, you know, just offering those supports to one-on-one office hours, more email communication, extra resources, it's so helpful during this time.
Thank you. Jared?
Well, as I mentioned, I've been doing weekly reflection exercises with my students to track their level of engagement and ask for tips on how things are going. And I assess things like, are they bringing their authentic self to class? Do they feel like they achieved balance, whatever that means for them that week? Do they feel like they've been challenged, the typical ABC 1, 2, 3 type of assessments? And I'm not finding that my students that are going through a 3-hour lecture on Mondays are having difficulties with it. And that could be that they're not telling me. So and if there's anybody here I don't see anybody down the list that's there on Monday. But I think part of it might have to do with the way that I tried to structure it and break it up. So here's what I circulate this to students. So this is the 527 Power, Politics, and Policy class. You can see how I circulate the schedule. I think this helps them to understand the flow. And sometimes I have to adjust it, as if our master class is going a little bit long, then I'll in real time change this for them. But they know what to expect from the day. They know how to prepare. They have all of their supporting activities there for them. And we build breaks in, and they know what to expect. And we always finish with a roundtable reflection where they all have an opportunity to talk about how the day was. In some cases here, we built in some joint sessions, but I think having that schedule for them maybe helps them to prepare mentally for what's to come. And they know that if it's a really not an engaging discussion for them, it's only going to last another 2 or 3 minutes. So I don't know whether that's the key to success or not, but it seems to be working for our group.
That's an awesome template, Jared. That is, yeah, I'm envious of that for some of my classes.
For the students, what proportion of your live meetings are using breakout sessions versus those that just plow through in plenary the whole time? Yeah, go ahead, Ansh.
Yeah. I think it was Dr. Wesley who mentioned, like sometimes having that extra time during breakouts to just to get to know each other, it can be really, really intimidating. I don't know why, but somehow the online experience even more so. I felt maybe because it's so new and I never used Zoom before the semester. So yeah, I think just having that little extra time during breakouts can be really helpful. I think Dr. Wildcat also kind of was kind of discussing this, right, with the idea of how in discussions, sometimes we really jump off each other, and that can be a really important part of learning. And I remember when I was in his Aboriginal politics class, we had these sort of sessions where we were with 3 other students, for example, and we would discuss and really expand our understanding of the concepts. And similarly, I've had that opportunity in seminars with Dr. Kahane. So yeah, I think when we have breakouts, to have just a 3-minute breakout and you have to discuss 5 things, I think ultimately, you end up in a situation where you're just sort of discombobulated and it's not as conducive to good learning. So yeah, I think it's really helpful to consider some of the limitations of that and how we can work around and facilitate great breakouts and plenary.
Thank you. We have just 7 minutes left. Do any of the camera off people want to step in and join us? Jeff, Cressida, Hajar, Catherine, anyone?
Sorry, I just want to thank you all. I realize I'm in the dark here, but this has been extremely useful. And I'm probably going to be emailing people about some, how to use some of those tools. Jared was very kind to volunteer. So over and out, all the best.
Thanks. Anyone else want to come in? It could be with an appreciation or with a new point or a question. Catherine, your mic's off.
Yes, sorry, I'm just going to echo Jeffrey's point and just say I also didn't teach this term. So this was super interesting, thoughtful. Honestly, it feels like it's the kind of conversation we should just keep having. Maybe once a term, just check in, graduate students, undergraduate students, instructors, to talk about how's teaching going? Because maybe focus it around a question, but this was really wonderful. Thanks so much.
Let's just maybe do a very quick round of the panel and maybe just looking ahead to next term, assuming that you are teaching or studying next term, something you're going to hold on to from this term or something you're going to do differently next term. And just jump in whatever order, take 30 seconds and just give us some little flash of something you won't do again or something you will do again.
Yeah, I guess I would just reflect that Feo and I had discussions about this early on, and we said we don't want to invest all of this time in starting up an online course and then or a remote course and then not seeing benefit in it later on. And I guess this discussion today, and thank you for the students especially for contributing to the discussion, because what I've learned is all the stuff that we're doing right, we can continue to do. So I was so worried about building a sustainable and repeatable remote course. You know what? We can take these principles, these ideas of structured flexibility, and we can build them into face-to-face courses too. So I just really appreciate hearing from students, especially on their experiences. Thanks.
Yeah, I had never considered the idea of a flex day. It's not something that ever, was in any of my syllabi when I was a student, but I think it's a great idea, and I'm definitely gonna have a think about it.
Renee, anything occur to you?
I'm right. I might have run out of thoughts, but I did learn so much from the other panelists and the other people who attended. So just thanks a lot.
I won't twist arms, but if anyone else wants to come in before we close.
Same for me. I think I really appreciate hearing insight from professors as well. Just that connectivity has been really helpful. And yeah, I guess carrying into the new semester, just extending that empathy to professors as well, as much as we do for students.
Thanks. Ansh?
Yeah, I'm just, I feel like the time has gone by so quickly and we've had such amazing ideas come up. First of all, I'm so thankful for this opportunity to be here as a student. I think I'm very minor in credentials to so many of the people here. So just to have like the opportunity to speak, I really appreciate it. And it's just so great to see instructors who come out and want to have these conversations and are really invested in great learning. It's so humanizing to see the fact that instructors and students are facing these challenges and how we can overcome them, how we can sort of work, being compassionate and address the issues we're facing today, and also work into the future and keep some of these things in mind. So it's really been wonderful, and I appreciate everybody for all the wonderful and insightful comments that you've provided. It's been a wonderful session.
Okay, I thought of a takeaway. Actually, it's on the, I'm sorry, I can't remember who said this about Yasmeen's syllabus, writing right into the syllabus that that there will be compassion there, around deadlines. I think in 101, in fact, we are very compassionate and flexible when students come to us. And in fact, I've just often wished that more students would. And so I really like the idea of writing it right into the syllabus. In the syllabus, we say, come to us and ask ahead, not after, but maybe writing right in there. And if you do, we are very understanding. So I think I might take that up. So thanks for sharing that.
Thanks. Noelle?
Yeah, I'll just ditto what my co-panelists have said. I really appreciate the department for putting this together, and to you, David, for sort of spearheading this, because we do, like I know that when I started this semester, I kind of thought, well, I'm probably going to struggle and I'll be the only one who's struggling because I've been out of school and, I'm working from home and I don't know my classmates and I don't know my profs and all of this stuff. So it's nice to, find company in misery, I suppose, but to share the struggles and it really feels great to have profs who genuinely care about their students' progress and success and are willing to take time out on a Friday afternoon to invite us to actually share our perspectives as compatriots in this journey. And I think as far as takeaways for next semester, I mean, it's going to be completely different yet again, right? We're dealing with now it's winter and everybody will have seasonal affective disorder and everybody will be craving the sun and we don't know what's going to happen in the next few months. So I think the takeaway, as my co-panelists were talking about, is let's just be real with one another and treat each other humanely and compassionately. Genuinely, I just think that's kind of all we can plan to do. So thanks everybody for attending.
Yeah, thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to everyone who showed up.